Welcome to Automotive Insiders. I'm your host, Jason Stein. Great to have you back listening again on this platform. As global trade pressures intensify and the trilateral US Mexico Canada agreement heads towards renegotiation, US manufacturing strategy is again front and center for suppliers. Tariffs, labor shortages, technology shifts, and cost competitiveness are reshaping where and how future programs should be built. A new landmark study from Arthur D. Little and MEMA Original Equipment Suppliers digs into those challenges with fresh clarity, identifying not only the realities of the ground, but the actions that can keep North America competitive in a rapidly shifting global landscape. From targeted reshoring, driven by specific program economics and strategic priorities, to urgent workforce solutions and smart automation investment, the study provides a sharp roadmap for the choices suppliers must make today to protect future market share. Joining us to break down the findings are Joern Boos and Frank McCleary of Arthur D. Little, who will share what suppliers should double down on, where they should avoid overcorrecting, and which stakeholders must align to ensure the U.S. remains a powerful platform for advanced vehicle manufacturing. It's Automotive Insiders, live from the MEMA Annual Conference.
Well, it's great to be here at basically the closing of the MEMA Original Equipment Suppliers Annual Conference 2025. Joern, great to be with you. Thank you for being part of the program. Frank, thank you for being part of the program. Joern, we'll start with you. And there's been a lot of talk around manufacturing competitiveness. You have a OE landmark study that's out. Share a little bit of background, if you could, on how the study was conducted, why it's so timely, why suppliers cared today, and as they gear up for renegotiation of USMCA, why does it matter?
Why does it matter? The study, the idea came about at the end of last year already. We sat together with Colin, the CEO of MEMA,
Right,
and talked about what are the biggest challenges right now. And it became very clear even then, with the international competition, especially the Chinese market players and others, and the softness to some extent, that something is going on. The industry is in a form of a transformation, and the manufacturing environment, especially the reshoring trends that we started to see, and then of course all the political discussions around that, lend themselves to this topic very well. And of course, if you look back, the US was once a net exporter. You have to go back to 1940s there. But we also had significant amount of more people working in manufacturing. And if you look at the statistics there, it's like you have to go back to the 1970s, 80s, where we had 14-15% of employees in the manufacturing realm. We're down now to 4.3, 4.6%. Comparable, China, Mexico, Germany, Japan, they're at still 13, 14, 15%. So why? What's the reason? And then very clearly, of course, with the new government coming in board, with the initiations of the tariff schemes that are out there, driving and hopefully driving more manufacturing back to the US. What does it take? What are the questions to be answered? What are the hurdles that we're going to stumble over or that we can't solve? And so that was the background of the study. The question then just came about, okay, how do we solve this? And the answer is, of course, we need to talk with the people that live and breathe it every day. And so luckily with MEMA and Colin supporting us, we were able to reach out to pretty much all the members of MEMA. We were able to directly interact with a survey with over 100 suppliers of all shapes, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 out there. And on top of that, we said, like, look, we can't do this just survey based. We need to really talk with the decision makers. Who are they? These are the CEOs. These are the chief executives, the COOs of and so who make the plant decision. Do I move a plant from XYZ, from China, from Mexico to the US? Do I build a new plant in the US? What are the decision factors here? So that's the reason why we then actually went deeper and said, okay, we really want to talk with those people directly, and ended up then with about 30 plus direct C-suite, very open, very constructive interviews, giving everybody the freedom to really speak from the heart, from their experience of like, what are the challenges? What are the risks? What are the factors for them to make a decision on reshoring or not? And that was the core and then the key input into the study.
So many people looking for answers today at the event as well. I think that's why we have record attendance, obviously, in amid amid the chaos, people look for some clarity, try to cut through the confusion. Were you surprised at the level of engagement?
Not at all. I think I've been in this industry myself for 30 plus years. I've been here in the US and worked around the world for 25 in this industry. And you see and feel the pulse of what's going on, and that people are hurting in a lot of cases. That actually was also part of the key studies to figure out, okay, or because we looked at different commodities too, to say, is there a common thread that's true for everybody? But with everything in life, is there somebody who really benefits from what's going on and somebody who really hurts them more versus others? And I think that there were the eye-opening items. It's like we asked, like let's remove all those rigid regulations, OSHA from the 1970s, the EPA regulation. What if we take all this away? Would that free up manufacturing? And the answer was no. People say, like, look, we want to be safe and sound with our people and employees and the people we live with. So that's not the solution. And it becomes out more, okay, what are the other topics? Oh, it's labor, automation, some supply chain challenges, wider policies and regulations, differences between incentives and tariffs. What's the carrot? What's the stick? And that's where it really became interesting to see the differences.
Frank, let's turn to you for a moment. The study shows that reshoring is selective and not universal. Based on the findings, what specific criteria should suppliers use to decide which programs or components truly belong in the North American footprint, and maybe which ones they should walk away from?
Yeah, so I think the key there is can we in the U.S. produce everything? I mean, if there's a will, there's a way, but is it competitive? And so that's where sometimes it gets into labor availability. It gets into also the component ecosystem. And what I mean by that is what else is dependent on the manufacturing of that component. So if we think of the finished vehicle, we can pump in more finished vehicles, but there's a long supply chain that's required to be able to supply that. So if we start looking at electronics, you have a lot of the test and back end that's still based in Southeast Asia. It's not like you can just all of a sudden pick it up and move it. And there's no incentive for anyone to pick it up and move it. So there are commodities that are not, again, it could be done, but it's not either cost effective or there isn't a player out there that's willing and wanting to do it. And so that's where we need to really look at across the board when we look at commodities and say where is the right mix where we can be competitive, where we can potentially be a net exporter, but more importantly satisfy market demand in the region. Where do we where does U.S. labor add value versus become a cost burden? Because a lot of suppliers aren't going to come in and then say, okay, labor is my issue, and then try and find the cheapest labor in the market.
Right.
That doesn't drive, that doesn't drive a good workforce. It drives a lot of churn. It drives a lot of competition, and you don't want to be in a situation, where we see in other markets where you have different plants down a road and advertisements offering 25 cents, a dollar, $2 more per hour. So where does the labor add value? And this is where, to Jörn's point, components that can be automated where you're now driving a more technical labor pool, higher paid labor pool, as well as what is the ecosystem of required to produce that part. And the best example is electronics, but if you even look at stamp parts, okay, where's my steel coming from? Am I going to have to import it all? Well, is it better to bring just the stamping, or do I just leave it where I have steel mills and source material coming from? So that's the other component. I think with regulation policy, not as big of an issue. You always have that nuance, country to country, and those are the major factors.
Your workforce and automation talent came through as a top constraint. What are one or two concrete actions the study points to that where suppliers could really take next steps in the next 12 to 18 months and move the needle and not just talk about the storage?
I think number one is always transparency. Do you really understand what you might be facing or already facing? So talking with your plant managers, talking with the chief of operations, talking with your head of HR, figuring out, okay, how big is my problem per se? Then on top of that, asking myself, okay, where are my plants? Where are my locations right now? Who's around me? Uh, why do I compete in the market with these people? Because there's no competitive advantage in a lot of cases, because I'm running out and try to find five engineers, or not engineers, but manufacturing experts, and this company here finds another. figuring out who are my possible partners actually to have training consortia. Who are the universities or schools and other places that can train that technical labor? And I think that that's in itself just getting the transparency and see who I could collaborate with, plus policymakers, of course, the local mayors, the school boards, and so on,
Right.
because that's the source. But then there's the other aspect, which is a little bit of a double click, because Frank mentioned this, is it's not just the labor itself, the availability, but it's also the connection to automation. We are in a high labor cost country. There's nothing that we can change much about. People will not go to $1 a day or $1 per hour or something like that. So we have to embrace automation. But automation also requires labor that manages and maintains that technology. And that's another level that we need to understand. So if you go back as a supplier to say, okay, let's talk about my automation scale that I have in my plans, what tools I'm already using, what's my crawl, walk, run setup to further automate, and then again, there understand what are the skilled people that I need to maintain this, to operate that. Getting that in the open and having an understanding, I think that is one of the biggest items to as a first step.
Final thing for both of you, and I'll ask you this first. Based on the findings, who are the biggest stakeholders, and what kind of action needs to take place? What specific action would you suggest?
So key stakeholders that very clearly came out of studies, it's not one person, it's stakeholders, it's clearly the plural.
Right.
We have the suppliers. We need to grab our own noses here and say, like, look, we have to do something by ourselves because not many people are going to help us to do this. So that's one. Number two, the OEMs. These are our customers. In a lot of cases, they're in the same boat. And there were clearly some news recently about some OEMs outspoken that they see similar challenges.
Yep.
So let's win together. Let's not lose together. And number three, clearly the policymakers. I think one of the biggest findings right now, which other countries are benefiting from, is a consistent and properly strategized industrial policies. Something that the industry players, OEMs, and suppliers can plan on for 3 to 5 years and not worry about, okay, in 2 months this changes, in another 3 months maybe this changes. These rules go out of the way, or they might be coming back now. You can't make a decision on that one. Giving that stability, working with the policymakers, who can also then encourage these, we call it training consortiums, and then help, because we see a lot of, call it the German training systems, even Mexico, China, and others have systems in place that really help them to bring those talents to bear. But maybe in addition,
Final thoughts from you, Frank?
Yeah, and it's sort of bottom up. We're not in a, we're not China. We're not, industrial policy that comes from the top down. And so there's an opportunity to really say, where are there winners and where am I not going to be competitive? And building it, from the suppliers really coming together and saying, where can we be competitive? Where can we truly add value? And then bringing it up to MEMA and other policy bodies, and with alignment with the OEMs, to then come up with, let's say, a capitalist industrial policy where we can all generate revenue, we can add shareholder value, we can add profitability, but at the end of the day, it's informing the administration on where should we make those bets, where should we make those investments, where should we drive that policy, and where do we need to protect certain areas through tariffs. But creating that balance, and I think that's the difference that you see in some of the other countries. It's very much top down. We saw that in other examples with the CHIPS Act and other things where it is a pseudo industrial policy, but it wasn't really intended for the OEMs. I mean, to a certain extent, but for the most part, it was for newer advanced technologies that aren't really captured yet. So that's where I think there's a potential opportunity that we haven't really, taken advantage of. And this is where, working together across suppliers, across OEMs, and then across, state and organizations like MEMA, but also state and at the federal level, to bring that together and say, okay, how are we going to secure the automotive industry in the U.S.?
It's the Arthur D. Little and MEMA OE landmark study, U.S. manufacturing competitiveness. Thank you so much for outlining all of it for us. Thank you.
Thanks again to my guests, Jörn Buss and Frank McCleary of Arthur D. Little, and thanks for listening on this platform. We welcome you back in next time for more great content about suppliers and the industry in general. I'm your host, Jason Stein. Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next time.